All right, you beautiful humans. Tipping culture has gotten completely out of control, but not in the way that you think, because everybody is talking about this like it's a battle between customers and the employees. And that's exactly what they want you to think.
The tipping culture in America is out of control. What do you mean? I've just got a bottle of water out the fridge myself, gone up to the till, and they've asked me if I want to tip them. What did they do? I got the water myself.
The real story is about how employers have figured out the perfect scam. You convince the workers that they can make more with tips, while convincing customers it's their moral obligation to pay those workers' wages. Meanwhile, the actual employers pocket the difference. And hey, I'm all for capitalism. I am a business owner. I have been a business owner. But here's the thing. I have been on both sides of this. I have worked as a server and a bartender making $2.13 an hour, so tips literally paid my expenses while I was in college. I also had a food service counter job where I made more than federal minimum wage, and there were no tips or any expectations that we would receive them. So feel free to come at me if you want, and I will see you in the comments. Because today I am going to be exposing how the system actually works and why both workers and customers are getting played, and most importantly, how to navigate this without enabling the real punks in this scenario, because centimillionaires and billionaires have been elected to make decisions for you, and this does affect them, but not as a consumer. But I will talk about that more in a few. So starting with the numbers, the federal tipped minimum wage is $2.13 per hour. And you want to know when the last time that was raised? 1991. That is 34 years without an increase, and I do understand that only 15 states pay this while the other states are paying more, but this isn't some accident or oversight. This is deliberate. And if you're excited about the no tax on tips, hold on to that thought, because we will address this, and then you can see if you're still excited about it. Because federal law allows employers to pay tipped workers just $2.13 per hour as long as tips bring them up to the minimum wage. But the translation here is that your employer legally shifts their payroll responsibility directly to the customer. And think about that business model for a second. So imagine if your internet company said, well, hey, we'll only charge you $30 a month, but our technicians make $2 an hour, so please tip them $30 when they install your service. You'd call that insane, but somehow in many services, we have normalized this. But the recruitment lie works like this. And here's the thing, unless I specify, like moving forward here, we're not talking about waiting tables and bartending. I will mention those specifically. But the employer comes with you at, okay, here's minimum wage, or, some kind of poverty wage. But here's the thing, you're gonna make way more with tips. But the reality is your income becomes completely dependent on customer guilt and social pressure. But here's what's happening now. 86% of Americans say tipping culture is out of control because employers have expanded the scam beyond the traditional service roles.
So, yeah, it says tip what you think is fair. So they're asking for a tip.
Do you ever
No,
tip
I
on
do
that?
not.
What do you think about this app asking you for a tip?
The audacity. I'm here to borrow money. I don't have any to give you.
Right.
Okay, surely nobody tips their banking app, right? But the data shows that the apps receive tips 73% of the time.
And that iPad flipping around asking for 20% isn't about rewarding good service, it's about subsidizing an employer who chose not to pay their workers. But let's break this down and how brilliant this grift is from the employer's perspective. And step one is pay workers almost nothing, even in states with higher tipped minimums, but they're paying a fraction of what workers need to survive. Step two is go ahead and sell those workers the dream that you could make $20 to $30 an hour with tips. What they don't mention though is that your income will fluctuate wildly, you have zero job security, and you'll spend those shifts performing desperation for strangers. And step three is shifting the responsibility to customers installing those point of sale services, like those systems that guilt customers into tipping through psychological manipulation. The default option starting at 18 to 20%. And if there's a no tip option, it's buried or made to look judgmental. The forced custom tip entry while workers watch you, and then the percentages are calculated on total including the tax. And as a side note, that POS system that business is using to process payments, well, guess what? They're being told that by adding in that tip option, it's a great way to offset those costs while the POS business is also raking it in on those higher fees. So step four though is profiting. So the restaurant owner can advertise a $15 burger knowing customers will pay around $20 or more after tip and tax. They get to keep menu prices looking competitive while customers actually fund their payroll. Now, that part that becomes heartbreaking though is that workers become trapped in this system and forced to pressure customers because their survival depends on it. So the psychological trap here is that your rent depends on customers feeling guilty enough to tip you, and then you have to perform extra emotional labor and accept bad behavior to avoid being financially punished. You start seeing customers as the problem instead of your employer. You become the unwilling enforcer of your own exploitation. That worker isn't the villain though, they're another victim who's been convinced that customers are responsible for their wages instead of their actual employer. Now, as far as my own experience as a waiter and the bartender making $2.13 an hour, it was up to me to make up that difference. But it was also something that wasn't really new to the industry, and I expected it. So in this role, I knew that this was about providing an experience for the customer. So once seated at my table or at the bar, it was go time for me. For those of you who just wanted someone to take your order, I probably was not your guy. I spent time with small talk, asking about your day. If you were new to town or just visiting, I was going to make suggestions about where to go and sights to see. I was making recommendations from the menu, making sure that your food was prepared how you like it, and if not, I was going to make sure that we corrected that issue quickly. I took this job very seriously, and I made it my sole mission to make sure each customer felt like they had an amazing experience. And trust me, you were going to leave that restaurant feeling better than when you came in. And yes, that is a work ethic that I have taken in all of my jobs. But as things have evolved, and not always for the better, employers saw how well this worked in these types of full service restaurants and thought, why stop there? Especially when COVID hit. So the new targets, fast casual restaurants where you order at a counter, which I did work in this setting. And again, we did not get tipped. Self-checkout machines like that is ridiculous. And any service where they can install a tip prompt. And don't get me started on what I heard about medical practices with tip prompts. I don't care what service you're providing and how good you are. That is just cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, because we are medical professionals and our patients deserve the best in every time that we provide service. Definitely feel free to hit me up on that one in the comments section. Please come at me. But research from Temple University found that customers feel extreme discomfort when asked to tip even before receiving the service, or when human interaction is minimal or, like I said, non-existent. And here is that trickle-down effect, and mentioning sort of these billionaires as we kind of start into that. So starting with regulation and finance, going into those POS systems, processing these payments to the employer that's been sold this scam that is being passed to the employee and the customer. So let's actually build and stack on that. So the no tax on tips trap, again, these people making these decisions. So this is actually a hook, line, and sinker scenario that sounds great until you realize what it is actually doing. By force feeding you this idea as great for you, it's a short-term win, because this would reduce pressure on employers to raise wages, because they'll use the tax benefits as justification to keep paying just enough to keep it around minimum wage as the base. And again, I was an employer, payroll, overhead. We paid our employees well. That was something that was important to me, and we had a very low attrition rate in that business. But here's the thing, the perfect expansion strategy. So promise workers that they'll make more while making customers feel morally obligated to continue subsidizing wages, all while employers keep their labor costs at poverty levels and keep profit margins growing. The international comparison here proves that this is a choice. In Japan, tipping is considered insulting.
I know that tipping is not done in Japan, but I'm kind of curious what would happen if I tried to tip at a Starbucks, because Starbucks is an American company.
Thank you. And do you have a tip jar?
No.
Do you have that jar anywhere?
Yeah, no.
Okay, sorry. Thank you.
So I just Googled it, and yeah, tipping is not only not customary here, but it can actually offend someone.
Now that you understand this real game, let's actually talk about recognizing when you're being manipulated. So the red flags here are, okay, tip prompts before any service is provided. That is a big one. Businesses that actually start those tip suggestions at 18 to 20%, any situation where you're doing most of the work yourself, and tip requests at self-service establishments. The psychology here that they're using against you, so there's social pressure, which, people behind either the counter that you're actually looking at the employee, and then also the people behind you that can see the choice that you're making. And of course, the guilt manipulation where it's, well, you're supporting our workers. Then of course, there is the time pressure. So these payment systems, these POS systems, were moving through the line fast, and probably not enough time for you to even think about, was this a rational expectation? And questions to ask yourself, of course, is looking to see, are they making tipped minimum wage, which is likely not the case in these particular situations, unless, again, you're a waiter or a bartender. Now, am I being asked to subsidize their employer's refusal to pay fair wages? And would the service even exist if the business had to pay proper wages? And remember, true service businesses can afford to pay their workers properly and include service in their pricing. When they don't, they're choosing to make you the bad guy for not wanting to pay twice. But here's how to navigate this without enabling exploitation while supporting workers appropriately. So always tip in those traditional services like where workers do depend on it. So sit down restaurants with table service. Now, this is actually where tipping fatigue is hitting hard because these roles definitely rely on this income. But I will say I'm a 30% or more kind of tipper, but at least 20% based on service quality is a good start because remember, they're also likely tipping out the busser, the bartender, and even the host staff. And of course, if you got belly up to the bar where somebody's making you a drink, $1 to $2 per drink or 15 to 20% on the tab. Now, food delivery, that's between $3 to $5 or 15 to 20%, whichever is higher. And I know gas prices might not be great in your area, but this is actually where those of you that are out there delivering a good used Honda Civic can come in handy. Not to mention that there's often a delivery fee on top of that. So hopefully the tip is going to the driver and the business is also sending them out with multiple orders so that they can stack those tips. And then of course there are hair salons, about 15 to 20%. Any service where workers are legally paid the federal tipped minimum wage. And as far as handling the pressure, this is going to take a little practice, but just responding like, hey, no tip today. Thank you. I appreciate your time, and doing that without guilt. Use cash when you want to control the exact amount. And hey, if they start with the suggestions of 18%, go to the custom tip and put what you think is fair. And remember, you're not obligated to subsidize a business model that you disagree with. And yes, I'm going to say that you can make your coffee at home and it'll save you a heck of a lot of time rather than sitting in a drive-through or having to walk in as you're on your way to work. The coffee at Starbucks isn't all that. It's just that they put so much syrup and other flavors in it that just mask the coffee. You can mess up your own coffee at home for much cheaper. But here's how to be a part of the solution instead of the problem. Tip appropriately where the sub-minimum wage system applies and give cash tips directly when possible because sometimes those digital tips, I don't think that they are reaching workers all the time. Please be kind and respectful regardless of your tipping decision and understand that most workers are trapped in this system. Now, we need to not enable the employers. This is the big one. So, hey, stop visiting those businesses that rely on tip guilt instead of fair wages. Support businesses which advertise, listen, no tip is needed, we pay our workers fairly. Call out the real problem here because employers who choose not to pay living wages, because here's the thing, when you're confronted about not tipping, try like, well, hey, I support fair wages being included in pricing rather than making customers subsidize payroll. And for the workers that are trapped in this situation, I totally get it. You need to eat, but also consider document those wage thefts if you believe your employer isn't making up the difference when tips fall short, especially if those numbers aren't adding up based on the tips that you've seen come across the screen on that POS system. And support that legislation to eliminate sub-minimum wage jobs. And also just look for employers who pay fair wages when possible. And as far as the long-term solution and looking through a different lens, we need to understand that many of these positions are what's considered a starting point for employees. It was a beginning for me. But for many out there just trying to make ends meet, as this is likely your second or third job, we have to vote with our wallets to get businesses to take note. Now, thinking about it here from a financial freedom standpoint, your annual subsidy, if you tip an extra $5 per day due to social pressure, whether it's coffee, lunch, or whatever it is, that is $1,825 annually. You invest that over like 8% getting that return, that becomes $56,000 over 20 years. The expansion cost here, though, is as more businesses adopt tip models, you're increasingly paying twice. Once for the product and service, then again for the wages that the employer refuses to pay. Now, you gotta budget for reality here. So calculate your actual monthly tip spending, and you might actually be shocked and appalled there. But when you're planning to eat out, add 25% to the menu prices just as a mental piece here. Just do that. Because if you can't afford the full cost, including those tips, especially for a traditional service, please choose a different option. And redirect that money that you save from not subsidizing wage theft businesses into your own financial goals. The choice really is yours. Continue funding a system that exploits both workers and customers, or set boundaries that force businesses to compete on actual value instead of guilt manipulation. I would love to know your experience with this wage shifting scam, whether you're an employee or a customer. And have you noticed businesses using tip guilt to avoid paying workers, especially if there's something new that we haven't seen out there? Let me know in the comments below. And hey, remember, building wealth sometimes means saying no to systems designed to exploit everyone except the people at the top. I appreciate your time here, and I will see you right back here on your next level up.